Thank you so much for staying with us. Let's talk about the resurgence of cases because we've seen this in, say, countries like the UK. Is the WHO concerned of a resurgence in Kenya?
I think so. I think across the world we've had the situation that after the first peak, people have relaxed and have gone back to the normal way. It's very understandable. People were very stressed by the restrictions. But that has had as a consequence the increase, the second waves that we've seen in Europe, in some of the American countries, in Israel and other places. So I think it is quite possible that Kenya will also face such a second wave. And that's, of course, not true only for Kenya, but other African countries. So it seems that African countries were among the last to actually have the first wave. And apparently it might be that also the second wave might be a bit later than the other countries. But it's certainly a concern that we have that this may come back. And this is especially true, of course, if people don't comply with the directives given by the government in terms of social distancing, hand washing, the wearing of masks and those kind of things.
Let's talk about the number of deaths, Dr. Rudy, because in the past days we've sort of like witnessed a spike in the deaths. Is this a reason for concern?
Yes, in the last couple of days there have been slight increase in the number of deaths in Kenya. In fact, the case fatality rate, as we call it, the number of the proportion of deaths in relation to cases has gone up slightly from 1.7% to 1.8%. So this is of slight concern. It does mean that more people are getting seriously ill and then, of course, are dying of this disease. So that in itself is an area of concern. The other thing that we're watching quite carefully is the admissions to the ICU, because that too is a reflection of the severity of the disease. Here in Kenya and, of course, in the rest of Africa, many cases are asymptomatic, which means they don't show any symptoms or any ill effects of the disease. But those that do have respiratory distress or high blood pressure or those kind of things actually are hospitalized and are placed into ICU. And that's what we're watching quite carefully.
Let's switch gears now to the rapid COVID-19 test, which I understand will be made available to the lower and middle-income countries. I understand they provide reliable results in about 15 to 30 minutes, but they are a bit less accurate. They're much faster, cheaper, and don't require a lab. Let's talk more about that with emphasis on the less accurate bit, if true.
Yes, you're quite correct. So the great advantage is this is a test that can be done in the periphery. It can be done in rural areas. You don't need a lot of skill to actually do this test. All the equipment that you need is part of the test kits. So there are great advantages in the ability to actually do the test. It's also much quicker, as you point out, within 30 minutes or so, you can get the result. The issue at hand is, of course, that it is not as accurate as the PCR test that we are currently doing. So there are possibilities of both false positive and false negative cases. So that you really have to weigh up against the ease of use that we find with this test. So potentially it is very useful in rural areas, in areas where there isn't proper access to laboratories, and in communities where you have a sudden outbreak in a larger group of people, where you quickly want to verify if this is the disease that is causing this outbreak. So those are the primarily foci of this test. But I think it will actually change the game in terms of being able to identify where the disease is currently active.
Okay, lastly, Dr. Rudy, in under a minute, let's talk about when we expect it to be rolled out to particularly Kenya.
We don't have that information as yet. So the announcement by WHO was an announcement that the test had been endorsed by WHO, and there's actually several tests that have been looked at. So the exact dates when these tests will arrive have not been communicated as yet, but we expect that within the next month or so we would be able to access these tests. In the meantime, of course, we continue to supply the PCR tests that the country has been using up to now, to make sure that we don't decline the tests further.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Rudy Eggers, the WHO country representative, Kenya. Thank you, as always, Doc, for making the time to join us here on News Desk. Let's move on. And the fourth and the last man trapped in a 5-story building that collapsed at midnight last night